thing to remember is that we're still a long way from, I think, the whole notion of general artificial intelligence,
which is the real,
which is the kind of worrying Skynet stuff, stuff. It's still not. It's not really lived up to the hype. I mean, I remember writing about this a couple of years ago and getting quite worked up about it, and it's all going to be apocalypse 2 or 3 years from now, and it hasn't happened. I think there's been a bit of a slowdown and a realisation that there's barriers they haven't been able to overcome.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Here we are in the office, and lockdown's just finished. Is it today? But we're not sure how.
We're supposed to finish on Wednesday.
Oh, is it Wednesday and it's Friday?
But it's not really the end of lockdown, is it?
No, we're still pretty locked down. So we're going to go for some beers after.
Well, attempt to.
We're going to attempt to, and we're not sure. Firstly, we're not sure what the eating thing is. They've had this incredibly trivial debate about whether a Scotch egg constitutes a substantial meal, because the rule is you can get pissed as long as you eat as well.
Yeah, there was a good newspaper headline, wasn't there? Like, can I have a Scotch egg and 17 pints with that, please?
Exactly.
Scotch egg is substantial.
I would say so. And if they say it's not, then what about 2?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's going to come a point.
What about a salad?
I'll have a salad.
What one person's substantial meal? As
you can tell, I eat a lot of salad.
Another person's snack.
Well, I think so. They might say you need to use a fork and knife for it. You know?
Yeah, maybe that.
So if you eat a bag of crisps with a fork and knife, is that all right?
It's got to be something other than just a bag of like pork scratchings or something.
Yeah.
Scampi fries. That's the only place you find them.
What about a side dish of like French fries and?
I think that should be allowed. Chips, pasties, especially if they've been nuked. Anyway, we'll see. And then we're not sure whether we're going to have to say that we live together.
We're going to get in trouble on this, aren't we? In a minute? Some police officer's going to watch it and
I've got to turn up with my arm around you going, me and my lover would like a drink. So yeah, God knows. I was chatting to someone else that we're going to meet up with, and they're saying that business meetings still allowed. But I'm
having a business meeting with my parents at the weekend.
Well, exactly. I mean, I just don't know. It's a complete mess. Anyway, we'll turn up and we'll see how it goes. But we're having a few before we start. In fact, we should mention, I haven't had this before. This is the Star Pramen is what I keep at home.
What do you mean you haven't had this before?
I haven't had it on the pod. I'm normally
normally brings cans in because they're too heavy to carry in.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not paid to say this, but I think it's the best Pilsner, like Czech beer.
Probably the best Pilsner in the world.
Yeah, certainly better than Carlsberg. And you were saying that your missus is Slovakian, buys it, so that's quite an endorsement, because she, I'm not saying she's an alcoholic or anything, but she must know her beer.
They know their Pilsners,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they're quite pro-Czech. In like, there's no sort of
separatist aggro.
There's none of that in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So
but do you ever have Slovakian beers?
Yeah, there's a few, but you can't get them here very easily. You can get them at like specialist Slovak shops.
Right, you'd only get in London or big cities or something.
But there's one called Zlatý Brzant, which is golden pheasant, which is pretty nice.
That's what that means.
Yeah, there's one called Martin, which is there's a city called Martin.
Right.
And
are they all in the sort of Star Pramen sort
they're all
Budvar sort of space?
Yeah, they're similar, but they're much better than. I mean, Northern European lagers, I think, are pretty appalling. All that Heineken, Carlsberg.
The Germans sometimes get it right. I mean, Beck's is okay. It's a bit.
No, Germany's okay. I think they do
Central Europe. Okay, but you're saying.
I think the Scandinavians and the Dutch do dreadful beers personally, and anybody who's watching from Scandinavia
Tuborg.
Tuborg, Carlsberg, Amstel, Heineken.
It's all just cooking lager, isn't it?
Just give up and do something else with your lives and drink.
Yeah, but those are like the mega corporations, though.
Yeah, they are.
But I mean, I don't think the UK. I think we're good at ales, but I don't think we're much good at lager. Is there like a proper?
No, well, we've got
UK
Carling, haven't we? That's a UK one. That's probably
and then
the worst
we import
of the lot.
like Foster's and other fizzy piss like that.
No, we're good at real ale in the UK, and then lager you really want to get from Europe.
Brewdogs, which we've got a little selection of here. I think it might be Scottish.
Yeah, I actually think Southern European countries do quite good lagers,
like Moretti or something.
Yeah, Moretti. I think Spain's got a couple of good ones. San Miguel, I think, is quite nice.
We drink when I'm in the Canaries, which I'm hoping to do. So I'm off on our last podcast, by the way, is going to be the 11th. Yeah, because I'm off on holiday on the following week, hopefully. But I've got to. The rules are right now that you've got to take PCR test, polymerase chain reaction, which is a test that identifies whether you got any fragments of the Rona.
For going to the Canaries.
You got over it. So there's two problems with that. One, of course, you take it, fail it, and then you can't fucking go.
Yeah.
The other one is it costs 170 quid a pop.
Well, this is the problem we're having because we're supposed to be going to Slovakia, and you don't actually have to have a test to go to Poland where we're flying to.
Right.
But crossing the border, we might require proof that we've had tests.
So you need to test your entire family. Wow.
Yeah, so you get 4 people done.
Quid,
exactly. We got the same issue.
I'm lucky France don't have that from the 15th.
But you keep an eye on the rules because they might change them. That's
totally
what we're doing. We're just monitoring what's going on.
It's going to go down to the wire, man. But anyway, so I'll be off on holiday in one form or other. And if I can't go on holiday, I'm certainly not coming here to talk to you losers.
I did when I was on holiday.
Yeah, but I'll be disappointed, won't I? I'll be crestfallen. And no one will want to listen to me mope and feel sorry for myself anyway. Or I'll probably be sort of drunk by the time I get in and just be abusive. Yes, that's okay. That's quite a lot of tangents, isn't it? Should sort of cut to the chase. So before I get into what we're going to talk about, I must remember to do that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook. What are you gesturing about?
Just give me a hissy jing.
He wants a beer. Then you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, which I'm now on.
Do you know what's a complete travesty? The Spotify app for TVs, whether it's on Samsung or Apple TV, doesn't support video.
God.
No, come on.
That is rubbish. I'm actually not impressed with the Spotify service in terms of clever algorithms, in terms of the tools it gives you.
Great, yeah,
the music's great, but in terms of the tools it gives you, I think it could do a lot more.
I mean, who wants to listen to Spotify on their TV?
Who wants to listen?
There we go.
I've got to explain to the audience that these two, I'll turn my back for 1 second, they started singing songs from the Queen, It's a Kind of Magic album. So that's why Ian...
I can't remember why it came up even now.
The Highlander quote.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Better to burn out and fade away.
That's the one.
Yes.
Got to say it with a really deep voice, though.
Yeah, better burn out and fade away.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
That was pretty good.
The cloud!
Yeah.
And then those cool metal noises, like at the start of that Prodigy song. Anyway, so yes, you can listen to it and watch it and all that. What we're going to chat about...
Have we got any time left?
Do you know what I mean? How long's that been? That's been about 10 minutes of just talking shite. We're going to talk about... we both covered some stuff to do with sort of IoT and automation. At its root, it's coming from this big AWS, Amazon Web Services fest that they have. 3 weeks. AWS invent,
I didn't realise
reinvent.
it was going on that long. I thought it was just
takes 3
this week.
weeks.
Wow.
I mean, just what's going on?
The TM Forum managed to drag their thing out for 6 weeks.
There is that, yeah. But theirs was just sort of now and again.
Couple of days, every week they had something.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going on then. I mean, normally when you go...
This is an online thing.
Yeah, it's an online thing, so it's not quite the same. But I mean, presumably when there isn't a coronavirus, they do it live. I mean, do you turn up for 3 weeks? Can you imagine the state?
Well, they've all got into these.
Do you know what I mean? Because when you go to those sorts of things, you have to have a few drinks when you're on tour, don't you?
They've all gone into the prolonging their events because they think it's better to do short sessions and spread it out over.
I think they do it because there's hardly any companies left in the world except for Amazon, so they think we might as well fill the vacuum.
There's a lot of online event fatigue, I think, at this stage of the year.
There is, yeah. So we both wrote about that, and I took a sort of predictably Orwellian angle. I said AWS brings 1984 to the edge because they're getting quite involved in the mobile edge. So anyway, we're going to chat about that.
Yeah. Vodafone figures prominently in my coverage of
Vodafone, and that's fine. There was overlap there. We had another chat with
less
our ex-alumnus.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about sort of industry numbers, basically. Telecoms industry numbers. There are a couple. There's some forecasts that we're going to chat about, and there's also sort of Dell'Oro market sizing up to the end of Q3.
Yeah.
So we'll have a little chat about that. And then lastly, you wrote a bit about OpenRAN, and I wrote a bit about the government coming out and saying how it thinks OpenRAN's a really great idea.
Yeah.
So we will recap on that, and that sort of slightly overlaps with the one we chatted about last week, which is like government intervention in markets.
Which is increasingly becoming synonymous with OpenRAN, it seems.
It does, doesn't it? Which calls into question if it's such a big, if it's so great, why does government need to keep poking its nose in?
Yeah.
So so we'll do that. So starting with Amazon. So I'll do my angle first, because hopefully for this podcast we did quite different angles, so we can sort of complement each other or disagree with each other. Let's see. I went for this 1984 thing. The main reason was because they've come up with this industrial IoT service called Monitron.
Right.
And, you don't have to be the most sort of swivel-eyed,
It's not going to catch on, is it, among civil liberties
Do you know what I mean? Monitron.
Just running through the Monitron.
Well, quite. And I had one bit in it, and I got a bit facetious, as is my wont. And I had one bit, and I went, presumably... Because there's another thing called, I forget the name of it, but it's a less jarring name, but it's a more jarring service, which is often the way. So Monitron is just for monitoring equipment and to tell you when it's starting to act up.
Yeah.
Which is all fair enough. It's just got a really moody name. But there's another one, his name escapes me. It's called something like Fluffy Bunny or something like that.
And it's far from fluffy.
Well, quite. Which uses, it calls computer vision to monitor people, and it says it's for the sake of health and safety, but that's fine. Even if it is, it's still monitoring people.
This is the same because a sort of subset of this was the specific deal that Vodafone did with AWS on the edge, and one of the, we can get into that more later, but one of the specific things they called out was this company called Unleash Live, I think.
Right.
Which is a bit of an odd name, but they're basically
especially
doing...
as I'm suspecting its aim is quite the opposite.
Yeah, they're basically doing sort of video surveillance stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
But the reason it's different from current video surveillance stuff is it allows you to transmit information in kind of real time, I suppose. You get the low latency advantage. So it gives authorities a better opportunity to kind of intervene at the moment it's happening and do something about it. And they've it was funny reading the press release because they said it's all about public safety needs, but basically it's just keeping more tabs on people more than they already do, essentially.
It always is. I mean...
But I think more and more of this low latency stuff seems to be quite sinister in terms of the applications. It seems to be about quick response times for... security agencies and this kind of thing, and city watchdogs and that stuff. I don't know. It's a bit sinister.
It is a bit sinister, and where I got most facetious was Panorama is the Fluffy Bunny one. So Panorama's the spying on people one, and I should note that Amazon pushed back on that, which I'll get to in a bit. For some reason, they didn't find my characterisation of their products as sinister and Orwellian.
They didn't like that.
It didn't exactly coincide with their marketing messaging.
No. What about taking over the whole world?
Yeah. And so I just went, I'll just read the paragraph. I went, everyone wants a safer workplace, right? But at what cost to privacy and liberty? This computer vision, i.e. network TV cameras, will spy on workers to make sure they're complying with best practice, such as driving forklifts properly and social distancing because of coronavirus. If they don't, we imagine a Punishertron 4000 drone can be automatically dispatched to deal with the errant unit.
I think an electric shock, like a collar. Yeah.
So obviously that last sentence is deliberately satirical, but not that far off.
Yeah,
I mean, when you got a Monitron.
Yeah.
Why not have a Punishertron?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's just...
It's like a real-time automated policeman, yeah? It comes along and just beats the shit out of you.
It feels like it. And they can talk about safety all they want, but then the police are supposed to be there for safety. It hasn't stopped them sort of nicking people for going and visiting their relatives and all that sort of thing while we've had the lockdown.
Yeah.
So, safety can be interpreted in lots of different ways. And whose safety are you talking about?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the safety of the individual or the collective? Because if the collective is like, this is what's safe, and the individual goes, nah, I'm going to do this, then that sets a precedent for punishing the individual for going against that. So anyway, there's all sorts of stuff. I can get into the weeds there, as you can imagine. So I just thought that was all funny. And look, to be fair to Amazon, And if the person who sent me the email correcting me, which I'll get to, is watching this, it's unlikely. They've gone all quiet. I know a lot of what Amazon does is just good automation. And actually part of the concern isn't how Amazon's doing it. It's just that Amazon's doing it really well.
Yeah.
The concern is just automation full stop. And that can seem really Luddite. But when not just, when you're starting to get not just really simple repetitive tasks automated, but it's going up the skill stack. And at the same time, you're having things like monitoring and enforcement and all that sort of thing automated. I don't think it's out of order.
Do you know what? This is what worries me most about this pandemic in a way. You've got all these, see what's happening at the moment with shops being locked down and, okay, they're open now, but we just had, what is it this week, Debenhams announcing store closures, 12,000 Arcadia. I mean, all these people, what they're going to do, they're probably going to go off and work in Amazon warehouses for a while, and then their jobs will be automated away because at that sort of level, if you believe that, we don't cover this very much, but if you read the kind of press that does write about this kind of stuff, the warehouse technologies they're now introducing means that they need fewer and fewer staff to actually do those kinds of jobs. And they're even talking about, we've probably both written about it, using drone technology to deliver packages that at the moment get brought round to you. And then you've got the kind of white collar side of it as well, and the operators, the sector we're in, we hear about this from them when we talk about sales and how people get their smartphones these days. No one's going into stores to do that. They just order them online. They get it through online channels. So all the staff who are in those facilities are getting laid off as well.
I'll tell you other funny thing. I was chatting to my dad. He was trying to get something sorted out. It might be my mate, actually. I think it was. He was trying to get something. That's it, because, I finished my book and I've been sharing it with people. Yeah. And he hadn't used his Kindle for ages, and he was having a nightmare getting it to work again. He had to get onto their customer support.
It's a bit of a faff having to do that thing. That
all that
it was
stuff,
not intuitive at all.
He couldn't even get that far.
Yeah.
And he said, I just kept getting these repetitive answers from this person. And I was going, it was probably a bot, mate.
Yeah.
And he's going, nah, because if you're not in that world, you don't realise how endemic and widespread these bots are.
Yeah.
And I was going, I'm telling you, mate, it's probably a bot. And then he's gone, that's depressing, because then you're starting to try to appeal to this, what you think is a human being at the other end of the line, using sort of social techniques and all that sort of thing, and you're just talking to a HAL 1000,
a dead person.
You know what pisses me off about the automation argument is that if you talk to the sort of apologists for automation, they'll always go, oh, well, if you look back at the last few hundred years, we've had automation for years. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, things have been automated and other jobs have been created in other parts of the economy. That's always been the sort of answer to it, that it won't kill jobs. It frees up time for.
We got a spinning jenny, but then people had to make spinning jennies.
Had to make spinning jennies, or they went from doing cottage stuff in homes to working in factories, and
it's largely true, that narrative.
Well, I disagree.
Up to date.
I mean, the trouble is that you can't always look at what's happened in the past and extrapolate from that it will carry on happening. Well. So it's a slightly flawed argument, I think, in that basis. Yes. And the problem is that you're now automating away. I mean, a lot of automation in that period, in the Industrial Revolution, even the sort of agricultural revolution, was all about, as you were saying, it's all about the blue collar workers, if you like. It's the labour. It's mechanisation, really. The automation we're getting now is the jobs those people were supposed to move into.
Well, and we don't really have
the thinking,
and we
stuff,
don't really have industrial labour anymore.
We don't have industrial labour, and we're losing the white collar stuff's going as well. I mean, there's no need for people like us. They could just automate our. They wouldn't be able to automate this perhaps very easily. And they wouldn't be able to automate some of our more opinionated stuff.
Well, that's one of my defences. If I'm ever challenged on being an obnoxious, disingenuous prick, I'm just like, okay, but you can't automate this.
Once you can,
That's entertaining,
like it or not.
There's a good book by an author called Yuval Noah Harari, who's written Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus. They're quite sort of dystopian reads.
Well, books starting with Homo.
Yeah, and then he's not all of his books start with that, but where are you going with this?
It's just being crude.
But he's a really good writer, but they're quite worrying because his take on where this leads is quite sinister, really.
Yeah.
The view of where it's leading to. But he was writing in a chapter about people who say, well, artificial intelligence can only go so far. Creative occupations. Painting a great picture or writing music, for instance, which I think are held up as the the kind of pinnacle of human achievement. If it's not, non-scientific stuff, this is very, very hard for a machine to replicate.
Yeah.
He went and interviewed this AI developer in California who's come up with this software that allows you to, well, the machine itself can basically compose in the style of any great composer. And then he moved it a level beyond that, where it would then start to sort of take the great composers as an influence, but actually do stuff that's completely, it's kind of its own unique style. So it's kind of trying to push the boundaries. And they played this to classical music experts and fans, the stuff that it had come up with.
It.
They couldn't tell the difference between, they were asked to choose between, because some of them didn't know all of Bach's compositions, for example. So they said there's a few.
So I was going to say something like Bach.
They couldn't tell the difference.
My limited knowledge of classical music, something like Bach, you could imagine automating more because it's quite a
it's quite
mathematical sort of
Baroque
thing.
Stuff's
isn't
quite
it?
formulaic, but this could do stuff
like
that Mozart and Tchaikovsky, the Romantics, it could do. It wasn't bound by any particular period.
So you like to think, and again, I'm not just going on about creativity because I've just finished writing a book, but I'm just thinking of the process I went through to write this book, which took years. And when you finally get around to reading it
this weekend, mate,
you'll presumably see. I mean, anyone who knows me will see a lot of my personality in it. Certainly, my mate who has read it says yes, for better or worse. Could you replicate that? I'd like to think. And maybe I'm clutching at straws here. I'd like to think there's some kind of unique thing like soul or whatever that'd be impossible to automate. Just some of the ideas I think about. I was chatting to my mate about the creative process of this, and a lot of it's serendipity because it took me years to write. A lot of times I'd just be walking to the station, daydreaming. A little bright idea would come up, and I'd write it down on my phone. Yeah. And how can you automate that process?
Well, I mean, we're the concept of the soul and all that stuff. We like to think that we're a bit special, but we're basically just very complex computers. So
we're going to get into
you put enough data
yeah.
into a computer, and it will come up with stuff that is original, which is what this composing machine was doing.
Well, there's that old thing about if you give a monkey 1,000 years,
yeah. I mean, the thing to remember is that we're still a long way from. I think the whole notion of general artificial intelligence, which is the kind of worrying Skynet stuff, stuff. It's still not. It's not really lived up to the hype. I mean, I remember writing about this a couple of years ago and getting quite worked up about it, and it's all going to be apocalypse 2 or 3 years from now, and it hasn't happened. I think there's been a bit of a slowdown and a realisation that there's barriers they haven't been able to overcome as quickly as some people
bring it
thought.
Back to the stuff we wrote about.
Brewdog or Hazy Jane?
Well, I want to try one of your Hazy Janes, so you better get started on those bad boys. It's part of what I think you do as a commentator, and as journalists we are commentators as well. That's one of the ways in which we try and add value is to put analysis and opinion into what we write. I agree that you could automate a straight "this happened." Yeah. That doesn't require a human being to do. But this happened, and this is the context of it, and this is what it might mean, and this is what we reckon about it, I think still does require humans. That's
harder to do,
yeah. So we try and add value, perhaps just in a desperate attempt to not be rendered obsolete.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you do is you extrapolate. You think, okay, this is this thing now, Amazon's doing this stuff, it's very good at automation, AWS is the best at public cloud, and now it's getting, the reason all this is directly relevant to telecoms, which we haven't really touched on yet, but we should stress, is because it's getting into the mobile edge. Because the reason this low latency IoT stuff needs to come to the mobile edge is because of simple physics. One of the reasons you get latency is there's the speed of light, which is very fast, but it's still a finite speed.
Yep.
And radio signals travel at the speed of light. So if a radio signal has got to go from a sensor or one of these spy cameras or whatever all the way to the core of the network, which is miles away, and then back again before a reaction can happen, there's a thing called latency. And so you get less latency. Granted, 5G has introduced extra things that reduce latency, but you also get less latency simply by having the journey that electron has to go on, that radio wave, it's not even an electron, is it? That wave has to go on, making that journey shorter.
Yeah.
So Amazon's getting into edge services quite a lot, which is very smart of it. I mean, look, I've got total respect for Amazon. Amazon, a online retailer is the biggest public cloud company in the world. I mean, fair play to them.
Yeah.
Talk about branching out and making a success
the biggest
of it.
everything in the world, almost.
Pretty much.
I mean, that was the angle I took on the whole AWS thing, was actually not so much the sinister sort of 1984 stuff, but it's still automation, because the edge is about automation to some extent. But I wrote specifically about the deal they've done with Vodafone
Right.
This week.
Keep talking, because I've got to open another beer.
And basically, I mean, they announced a tie-up a little while ago. I think it was this time last year, actually. I think at AWS Ignite, or whatever they call it, December 2019. Reinvent, sorry, not Ignite. Ignite's probably Google's one, isn't it, or something?
Yeah, something.
But
something wanky like that.
They announced an edge tie-up about a year ago with Vodafone and a few other telcos, Verizon, I think, SK Telecom, and one other that I'm forgetting. But this is almost like a sort of evolution of that, and the plans are a lot more concrete. And what Vodafone's basically saying is next year, spring-ish time, I think, 2021, they're going to launch an edge service in the UK, and then later in the year one in Germany. And they've come out with pretty specific data points on it. They're saying that it'll be sub 10 milliseconds. So the stuff you've just been talking about,
latency, yeah.
Getting that latency down. The higher the number, it's opposite to bandwidth.
Yeah.
The higher the number, the worse.
So you don't want, ideally you want zero latency. You want things instantaneous.
Yep. And normally at the moment, they're apparently on Vodafone's networks. If you look at the whole
like 100
data signals,
so,
about it's between 50 and 200. So
that's what I got for Jamie too.
Yeah. Well, it's also in the press release if people didn't want to bother talking to Jamie, but
right.
But he did add other details.
Jamie's been on this pod more since he left than when he was working.
Yeah. But they're saying with this tie-up, so what they've done is they've taken this software from AWS called Wavelength and an edge server, and you basically install that in your edge computing data center, and you put your applications there as well, and you push out your sort of network functions in parallel. And you've got your latency down to under 10 milliseconds. And what that allows you to do is have some of these things that you were just talking about, like Monitron and Unleash Live, and things that require sort of things that need a kind of instant response.
So actually, you can help me out with this, because I sort of understood it when I was writing it, but I've already forgotten because I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah.
Why does Amazon need to get involved? Why do we need Amazon as some kind of intermediary or some kind of facilitator to all this?
Well, the stuff that they're putting into the computing center that allows this comes from Amazon, doesn't it? It's the company that's developed. I mean, they're a cloud computing company, and they have software that allows you to support all this. Because
it should be stressed. So some people listening who might not know, Amazon actually, I think, makes more money from cloud than it does retail.
Right.
I think so. Profit. Sorry,
Profit,
revenue, turnover much higher for just
retail,
buying TAT off Amazon, but the margins are obviously quite low.
Yeah.
I think in terms of profit, i.e. the most important metric, it actually makes more from AWS.
So you just answered your own question there, basically, that this is a profitable business for them. Edge computing is an extension of their cloud computing business, basically.
But my question wasn't why is Amazon doing it? Why can't operators do it without them?
I just don't think it's their core competence, is it?
Right.
Is it? I think they have I mean, if you listen to it from the angle of people who want to say there's an opportunity it's a win-win, if you like. The operators bring, for a start, they have the network technologies, they have the last mile stuff, they have the 5G network that provides the connectivity, and they also have the facilities that might be used for edge computing. So if you go and talk to someone like Telefonica about this, or BT actually in the UK, they talk about, maybe in the future edge computing becomes, hundreds of mini data centers across the country, kitted out with the appropriate software and servers supporting, really, really low latency, critical communication services. That's infrastructure they have that a company like Amazon doesn't have. So, and then Amazon brings its big cloud computing heft to it and IT skills, basically.
Right.
And,
so it's basically getting that utility and turning it into something useful.
But the platform they're using, that Vodafone's using, is from Amazon. The actual the Edge platform is an Amazon-developed platform, so the wizardry comes from them, really. Now, the interesting thing to me about it, one of the interesting things to me is, as I just said, with BT and Telefonica and certain other companies, I mean, BT, I remember being at a conference maybe a year and a half, where they were talking about turning 100 of their sort of metro exchanges into edge facilities in the future. What Vodafone seems to be saying is that you can do this with just a handful of data centres. I mean, they've got this one in London that they're going to be using for the rollout in spring, but they're talking about being able to support a service between Newbury, which is the headquarters in the south of England, and Birmingham, which is about 90 miles north of Newbury, on sub 10 milliseconds over that distance.
Oh.
So all this stuff about...
So it's not like you need
this is the thing.
to the
you
edge.
don't need... Well, I just wonder... I remember
to me,
talking to Scott Petty about this a while ago, who's the CTO of Vodafone UK, so someone that our friend Jamie probably has quite a bit to do with these days.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, what about edge computing? This is maybe 2 years ago. I was chatting to him. What are you going to do about investment in edge facilities? Oi, Petty. What are you going to? Yeah. What are you going to do about getting the edge out and changing your sort of exchanges into mini data centers and all this kind of stuff? And how many do you need? Do you need sort of hundreds of these things? And he went, no. We'll probably do the whole country with 8 data centers and provide a 15 to 20 millisecond service. And it now seems they can go even better than that, sub 10 milliseconds.
Well, let's not forget the speed of light's pretty quick, isn't it?
Maybe 3 or 4, maybe less than that. So
that's a good point, isn't it? Because sometimes when I'm envisaging the edge, we sort of imagine a little mini data center at every base station, don't we?
You do, and that would never be practical anyway, because the investment required would just be too much to turn every base station into... to have all the stuff installed at each base station would be a massive investment job. And this is one of the things that Scott Petty said. He said that argument about needing loads and loads of little data centres is one that the server companies love that,
right,
obviously, because they can sell loads of equipment. But
and Intel
actually,
and all that.
You can do this stuff with much, much less. And sub 10 milliseconds is enough to do... the stuff that we've been talking about, some of this sinister stuff.
I
stuff. I mean, maybe you need even less than that.
When you get into the really utopian remote control stuff, like robotic surgery that we always take the piss out of, but even slightly less utopian, like automated vehicles. I suppose if you're talking about crash avoidance, you always want that latency as low as possible. What's 10 milliseconds is 100th of a second. That's pretty quick, isn't it? That's certainly quicker than the reaction time of a human being. Yeah.
1
Let
millisecond.
Alone a human being who's had a couple
is
of star
a big
problems.
difference over that, even. So
10 milliseconds possibly enough. I mean, they'd have to go further. This is a bit of a tangent, but when we get into it slightly overlaps with the sort of Luddite stuff. When we get into automated vehicles, first time one of them has a crash, they basically need to be a lot better than a human being.
Yeah.
A human being has a crash because they're just dicking about or trying to get their kids to shut up, or they're distracted by a billboard or whatever. No one really thinks about it.
Yeah.
But, if a machine has a crash, they're going to need to prove that they've just ticked all the boxes in terms of providing the absolute maximum technology they could to prevent
I think
happening.
Probably the whole self-driving stuff is further away than we've speculated in the past because of things like that.
But when we talk about automated vehicles, it's degrees, isn't there?
Yeah. But, I mean, you asked an interesting question before about why did they need Amazon, and the fact that it's developed this platform, and they're the kind of cloud computing giants. They're a kind of go-to person, and it's interesting that all these edge deals that are being announced and Vodafone certainly seems to have gone further than any other European company, as far as I'm aware, in terms of doing a deal with a web giant that has a specific low latency component to it. But I suspect others will come. And they're all going to be with AWS or Google or Microsoft, yeah?
Guess so. Oracle's trying to get involved.
And this is, there might be some others, but it's all... It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because
there's not many players.
There's not many players, but this is the question: is operators have complained for a long time about what's happened in the basic consumer sort of telecom market, where they feel like they've been a little bit sidelined, perhaps, and all the attention's gone to
like OTTs
companies they call them OTTs, which is an expression some people don't like.
We don't really talk about that so much anymore.
But could this happen in the edge, though? This is the thing. You're letting edge companies into your network.
Well, that's why I brought it up. That's why I brought
and that's
it up.
the interesting
We're
thing to
letting
me.
the fox into the hen house.
That's
again.
the interesting story, really, with all of this. I think is where does this lead to in the future, where you've got these partnerships with Amazon and Vodafone, and I remember talking to Jamie and saying who takes the lead in the customer relationship, and it sounds like a lot of stuff still needs to be worked out yet, and the pricing needs to be announced. But there has to be a concern in the industry, I think, that. Do operators just end up again being sort of this new exciting edge opportunity that they've been talking about for a long time?
So
they just end up becoming commoditized again and doing.
Make the most
they
of the
do the
money
grunt work, and the guys who do all the exciting stuff and make the money are the big web giants. And
yes.
And this is why I think these sort of public cloud enthusiasts, and we've mentioned a couple of them in the past, who. Whenever there's a deal that's announced that doesn't involve the public cloud, they seem to think it's an awful thing.
Yeah.
I think there's major questions about using public cloud companies and where it takes the industry in the long run. And retail is dead these days. The high street that they're trying to protect at the moment by allowing shops to open but not pubs is gone anyway. I mean, they've got it the wrong way around, to be honest with the government. If you want to have a high street in the future, you should actually allow the pubs to open, because Amazon can't replace those yet. But there's no need for a John Lewis or a Marks and Spencer's.
Well, yeah. I mean, so there's a very topical current affairs narrative of, I think I don't think we mentioned it on a pod, but we were talking just before. Oh, maybe we did, like Arcadia and Debenhams and all that. So much stuff has economically been destroyed because of the response to this pandemic.
They were in trouble anyway.
Yes,
and now the government.
But plenty of people who weren't in trouble are also.
Yeah, but this is one of the criticisms of the. I mean, we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but one of the criticisms of the furlough.
But it's relevant to this. A few big companies taking over everything narrative.
And one of the criticisms about the furlough, and America did things quite differently to a furlough. They had a sort of employment support system.
Yeah, they've been shite as well, though, judging by the.
They've been a bit shy, but what they haven't done is say, we'll keep your job alive and carry on paying you when it's a job that might not be worth protecting in the future. Now, again, you don't want to.
And you've got zombie companies and that sort of
zombie companies, and actually most of these high street retailers, let's be honest, they're zombie companies. They're on limited time. They really are, because the future of the town centre is not a place where people go to do shopping. If anything, it's a place where people go to eat and drink, and it might not be that if they carry on.
I think your position is slightly nuanced, because there are other people who have made a success, maybe in part because they've done better.
Only by going into experiences.
Yeah, and doing e-commerce better, like Next or something like that. But anyway, your broad point I concede. Something like Arcadia. I mean, Philip Green looks like a complete liability at the best of times anyway.
Yeah.
He's like a 60-year-old bloke with a mullet. That's not a great start as far as I'm concerned.
But the telecom angle to bring it back to that is that the big web companies that's one sector that they've totally disrupted retail, and we're now in a situation where they're advancing into the sector that we write about, and I just think there's got to be questions about where it ends up, really.
And I suppose what's relevant about the tangent we just went off on about sort of industries being damaged by the reaction to the coronavirus is it just seems to accelerate what was already happening, which is a consolidation, and with so much. Increasingly, like if you look at share prices, everyone's share prices until about a month ago when they started coming out with these vaccines, everyone's share prices went down the toilet, except big tech, which just kept going up.
And then the vaccines Zooms went down the toilet.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a correction. Anyway, I want one more thing before I move it on.
How long have we gone on that one for?
That was a good 40 minutes, I think.
Bloody hell.
Nearly, yeah.
Yeah. Before I move on, so my Amazon one, they sent me an email.
Oh, yeah. What did they say?
They said, Hi, Scott, I saw your article. Oh, yeah. Firstly, actually, I didn't put the subject field in this, but the subject field said, from AWS, corrections. I mean, that's pretty fucking presumptuous, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But so when you're a big web giant that controls the world, you can just impose your will on other people.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? No attempt to sugar the pill at all. Go, hello, Scott, you're wrong. Here's how to make yourself not wrong.
Your opinions are wrong, Scott.
And they just obviously don't know me very well, because as soon as someone talks to me like that, I just dig my heels in. Hi, Scott. Yeah, I am a child. I'll admit it. Hi, Scott. I saw your article. I'll hold my breath. I saw your article and wanted to flag that your depiction of Amazon Monitron, Amazon and AWS Panorama are factually and technically inaccurate and need to be corrected. They need to be. Do they? Or what?
They're going to come down.
What happens if they don't get corrected?
They're going to cancel the Amazon Prime account.
You're going to be Punisher-troned.
I'll be Punisher-tron. Well, they're kind of proving my point, aren't they? By using this passive-aggressive language. And you go, I'll list each issue for you. That's nice of them, isn't it? Along with an explanation. And I'm not going to read it all because they go at great length. But, they have a go. I say, they quote me as saying, the thinking is this significantly cuts the number of technicians you need to employ and the level of training even those few remaining ones need, because the AI does most of the heavy lifting. Then you just need some minimum wage drone to perform simple repetitive tasks as required. Again, a bit hyperbolic, a bit of a characterization, but I still think the essence of it is true. Yeah. They're trying to de-skill people and replace them with AI. Anyway, and they go blah blah blah, which is basically like a copy and paste from their press release, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think I even finished reading it because I got bored. And then they go, the genius. This is quoting me again. The geniuses at AWS decided Monitron was a great name for something that keeps an eye on everything. And again, they go, well, they're technically inaccurate. Here's some reasons why we're right and you're wrong. And it sort of goes on. What were their 5 points? And then I like the concluding paragraph once they finish listing my many flaws. Please let me know when you'll be able to update your story.
Did you bother responding, or did you just ignore them?
I copied and pasted their whole email, keeping it anonymous, because we know it's not cool to name and shame communications people. They're just doing their jobs at the end of the day, even if they're doing it in a rather passive-aggressive way. Yeah. I just copied and pasted the whole thing, whacked that at the bottom of my piece as an update, and then sent them an email back going, yeah, thanks, updated. And they haven't got back to me. They presumably saw it and just thought, fucker. Because last thing they want is their emails copied and pasted in the public domain. But I think I did it in a sufficiently discreet way, i.e. keeping it anonymous.
Putting it into comments, you mean, or at the bottom?
I put it as an update at the bottom. Yeah, not even in comments. I just put it as an update in bold, going, Amazon got in touch, is what they said. Yeah. Without any further commentary. But I didn't change the body copy. No. Because this is another thing, actually, very quickly. This is something that I know up here.
We're done now. Let's go to the pub.
Companies increasingly, this is a journalistic thing, this isn't a telecoms thing at all, but increasingly journalists will amend, but because nearly all publications are electronic these days, they will amend stuff, but won't even say they've done it. So they'll memory hole it. Yeah. And I think that's what they're asking me to do, is change the body copy. But as far as I'm concerned, as soon as it's published, whether it's electronic or print, it's out there. Yeah. And the ethical thing to do is to put updates at the bottom. Yeah. But never. The only thing I ever amend is typos.
I meant typos.
That's which I have to do all too often. Anyway, so that's that. I better discipline myself there. What are we going to talk about next? We're going to talk about industry numbers. So there's a couple of industry number stories. The one that I wrote myself was Dell'Oro, which I think we all accept as the best analyst house for kit vendors. Mm-hmm. Do we accept that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Yeah, so do I. And Ericsson certainly does, because they swear by them. And then the other one was another Analysys Mason sort of forecast. Oh, no, we're going to get onto that in the OpenRAN bit, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, the Analysys Mason, they did a...
Oh, they did another one, yeah,
They didn't do anything to do
Sorry,
with...
I was tripping over myself. There's two Analysys Mason
things. They did
Okay, so I'll do the Dell'Oro one, and I'll ask you about Analysys Mason, yeah?
Okay.
So Dell'Oro, basically, the interesting thing about the Dell'Oro numbers is that the two big telecoms kit vendors that have done best this year in terms of increasing overall market share.
This is overall telecom revenue, not just RAN or anything.
Exactly. This isn't just mobile. This is
the
mobile,
whole equipment market.
This is mobile and fixed.
Yeah.
So it includes people like Cisco and Ciena and all that sort of thing. But even within that context, the two that have done best are drumroll, Huawei and ZTE, which is a bit counterintuitive given the well-documented hassle they've been getting off the Yanks all year. And so I think the primary explanation of this is just the Chinese market. But I think there are some nuances within that. So the Chinese market's huge. We all know that. I think there was
700,000 base stations by the end of the year.
700K, and there was
5G base stations.
And then there was another story reported in China Daily, which I know any Chinese media, you have to take with a pinch of salt because they don't tend to stay functioning very long if they deviate
it's
too
Xi
far from the
Jinping's
party
favourite,
line.
isn't it?
Yeah, well, I don't know. There's Global Times, there's People's Daily, there's Xinhua, which is obviously the sort of state thing. So China Daily, I don't know much about. I'd have to ask Wei. I always ask Wei, how in the pocket of CCP is this particular one? Because there are degrees.
Yeah.
But, I mean, none of them are just going to come out and go, Xi Jinping's a fucking idiot.
An arse.
Yeah, they're not going to hang around for long if they do that. Arguably, nor is anyone elsewhere in the world. But that's
you're in trouble now.
Well, quite. I already know I'm not going to China.
No, you were quoting hypothetically. You didn't say.
Don't worry, man. I'm going nowhere near China. I've written too many.
No, that's still too far. You can't.
I've written too many things.
Well, your colour is a bit Mao,
A bit Maui. Yes. The China Daily thing said they reckon there'll be 1 million of them, not a billion, as per one of my typos in that story.
That would be a lot.
Yeah, 1 million of them next year.
That'd be good for edge computing.
Yes. There'll be one per dude in China, wouldn't it, more or less?
Your own personal base station you can strap to your back.
Which would be handy for 5G.
It would.
For millimetre wave. So, yes. So that's but the interesting subtext of that. So, I mean, we know the Chinese market's huge, not just by virtue of its population, but by virtue of how advanced it is against that population. For example, the market's much bigger than India, which is actually catching up with China in terms of total headcount, isn't it?
It is.
But China's more advanced technologically, and I think there's, funnily enough, actually a better distribution of wealth in China than there is in India.
Do you know what it says to me? It says that bugger all's been happening in the rest of the world this year. Actually, I think. So I think, let's assume that things improve a bit next year and we start to get this vaccine out and we come out of lockdowns and there's a bit more investment activity. Quite a lot of European operators have not, they've not moved ahead perhaps as fast with their 5G rollouts as would have happened if we didn't have coronavirus and if we'd had spectrum auctions, etc., etc.
I see, yeah.
Deals have been announced. BT's done deals with Nokia and Ericsson and there's other stuff. But you look at Ericsson's numbers, in its Q3, and all the growth comes from China.
I know.
This is why China's so important to them. And they only have 10% of that market.
And that's
10 to 12%.
One of the reasons
Nokia's
is struggling.
Yeah, and exactly right. And I think any growth is come from that Chinese market where they claim to have got over coronavirus a lot more quickly than the rest of us, and we're never really sure what's going on there.
Have you read The Spectator this week?
No, not yet. Didn't turn up today.
Oh, right. I read it on my phone on the way.
Well, I do as well, but I prefer to read the hard copy because I'm a bit of an old traditionalist. But,
fair enough. Well, there's a Douglas Murray piece where he goes on about reparations and stuff.
Right.
But one little data point he puts in it, how recently they announced the UK economy is going to be down 10% year on year or something like that. Well, China's actually going to grow this year.
Right.
And so people like Douglas Murray...
It always does though, doesn't it?
Well, yes.
It's how quickly it grows.
Yes. Yeah. There is that. But people like Douglas and Murray going, well, they seem to have got over it all right. And so they're starting to put two and two together, I think a bit tenuously. I'm a big fan of Douglas Murray, but I think on that one he might be reaching a little bit.
Yeah, maybe.
But, they're making the point, how come China's got over it so well and we're all still fucked?
Well, because they're a totalitarian state. Where
I think that is a big reason.
Flats and
that is a big
not have
reason.
them come
so they
out
could
for
just...
pub ventures and
there's no moaning about having to have a Scotch egg.
There's no people sitting around on Wandsworth Common drinking beers with the police going, "Oh, you should really move on," but not do much about it. That's,
you do what you're told in China, don't you? No, I think that's a really good point. And actually, that to circle back to what we were just talking about with the kit market, I think another reason Huawei and ZTE have done well is with all this stuff they've been getting from Trump and the US. You can bet Xi Jinping will have been... In fact, he's been overt about it, about mobilising the whole country, including private enterprise, to make sure that they survive this attack.
Yeah.
And so he will have been chucking money at operators, at Huawei and ZTE. We had this weird little acquisition of Huawei's Honor smartphone sub-brand.
I think this is the other thing, though, as well. When we talk about equipment, which is what Del Oro does, rather than handsets. Yeah. A lot of the impact that's happened on Huawei so far has actually been on the consumer business, where it's more noticeable quite quickly. Equipment markets, it tends to play out, I think, over a longer period of time. You know, they've had these restrictions announced in some European countries, and some service providers have said, whatever the government's doing, we're going to use Ericsson or Nokia, like in Belgium. You know, some of those are quite small markets for a start. Sweden. But it's not had an effect yet. It's what happens in the future. And you've also got to remember that they were never in America in the first place. African markets don't give a toss about all of this, I don't think. No. They'll just do because China basically owns Africa anyway. They'll just carry on using Huawei and ZTE because they care more about them than what you know, Biden or Trump's going to say.
And they'll be getting all kinds of money on the slide.
You know, and then some other Asian markets. As far as I can see, the situation in Asia is that countries that didn't really use Huawei very much before are not using it, and countries that did are just going to carry on doing that. So, you know, India's an interesting one. You know, there's been this big sort of faffing around about what India does with Chinese vendors, but you know, as far as I can tell at the moment, it's all a bit inconclusive anyway, really. And it's not as though they're rolling out 5G kit yet. They still haven't had a spectrum auction.
I'd be very surprised, given how they're acting towards apps.
Yeah,
and how people are all clubbing each other in the Himalayas.
Yeah,
I'd be surprised if there's a lot of Huawei and ZTE.
Although apparently the operators are asking for Chinese kit vendors to be allowed into trials. It's a story that's come out this week.
Oh, interesting.
But it wouldn't. The point is, with Dell'Oro's numbers, it wouldn't have had, I don't think, at the moment, what's going on in India, which is basically just a lot of talk about should they participate in trials. It's not as though they've even started deploying 5G networks. I think we'll see the impact on Huawei will come in the future, really, from what's happening in the equipment side. I don't think, and it will be mitigated obviously by what's going on in China. So the question is whether this huge investment that's happened in China this year, you know, 700,000 base stations, is there going to be a bit of a drop off in China next year?
Well,
how many bloody base stations do you need?
I mean, it's just a guess, but this report is going 1 million next year,
or another 1 million next year.
Yeah.
I mean, what are they doing? There's a base station in everybody's house.
Well, there's 1.2 billion.
Yeah, but it's what's the 1.2 billion Chinese people. There's say 350, 400 million in America these days.
Yeah.
So but you wouldn't have.
So how many?
There's far
have you got any idea off the top of your head?
I know it. I don't actually know the figure, but I know it's a lot less. In fact, I think Deloitte came out with a paper where it did base stations per number of people, per 100,000 or something like that. A bit like a coronavirus calculation, and it was a massive difference between China and the US.
Yeah, they've been building out like crazy, but they, as we've covered, they've got this sort of top-down centralised thing. So, you know, notwithstanding Douglas Murray conspiracy theories about how come everyone else is suffering and they're not, they've also got, you know, this is the argument in favour of undemocratic countries, is they're more efficient. And by the way, they are.
Yeah.
But it just so happens that they tend to
they're undemocratic.
And they tend to end up being massively oppressive, and obviously favouring the people holding all the power.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yes, it's perfectly plausible that they will have rebounded better, and that their economy will have rebounded better because you will have got a lot more sort of Keynesian stimulus spending going on. And I bet they've been doing that like crazy. So yes, that explains it. So let's move on. Analysis Mason Way wrote that for us, and I obviously read it, but it goes in one eye at the other.
Well, don't expect me to shed a huge amount on it. I mean, I know I didn't cover the story myself, but they basically I came out with some top line forecasts about how the market's developing at the moment.
So why don't you just get straight onto the OpenRAN stuff, because you've got some thoughts about
that. Yeah, I mean, well, my OpenRAN thoughts really don't come so much from Analysis Mason as.
But they've got some forecasts.
They have some fairly big numbers that they're attaching to OpenRAN and where they expect it to be going in the mid 2020s, which I queried with them and haven't had a response yet. I mean, we've had a few of these actually in the last few weeks, which I find interesting, and it makes you wonder if companies are mistaken about what the RAN market is. You know, whether they're sort of mixing other things up in the RAN market and perhaps including other equipment in that. Because if you take Dell'Oro's numbers, and it's not just Dell'Oro, it's Omdia. They both put the RAN market at, let's say, about 35 billion a year at most. You know, the amount that gets spent.
RAN market.
Overall RAN spending. If it's strictly RAN, you know, we're talking about the base station stuff and all that. Yeah. The actual wireless market as a whole is about, according to Delora, it's about 150 billion. Because you've got investments in the core, you've got a lot of investments in passive infrastructure, cement, steel, civil engineering works, all that kind of stuff. Backhaul.
But it's still infrastructure. It's not tariffs and stuff.
No, this is infrastructure.
Yeah.
So RAN's actually quite a small part of the overall wireless.
Fair enough.
The overall wireless market. Now, Analysys Mason's forecasts are that OpenRAN, bearing in mind this is a 30 to 35 billion market annually, will be a 40 billion. OpenRAN will be 40 billion by 2025,
so
which I don't understand how that can be the case.
OpenRAN will be bigger than all RAN.
OpenRAN will be bigger than all RAN, and I don't know what they're expecting to happen to traditional RAN in this time frame. So I looked at the other thing that's come out. We're talking about market sizing. The other thing that's come out this week, which I wrote about today, was our own sister company's numbers on OpenRAN, which is Omdia. So Daryl Skoular, who's sort of practice leader at Omdia, who does all this stuff, came out with his own figures, which to me seem really, really sensible. I'm not just saying that because they're a sister organisation.
No,
just
we're
sort
allowed
of putting
to
it
slag
into
off
context.
people. I'll slag off like reading. I don't care.
Yeah,
I'm mental.
So his figures are OpenRAN. I think it was even my headline more or less. OpenRAN is a $3.2 billion market by 2024, and he actually put it in context of what that means as a share of spending on 4G and 5G RAN equipment by that date, which is 9.4%.
Right,
which is pretty much
let's call it 10 and be generous.
Which is actually tallies very closely with what Deloro is projecting over that period.
So that's that's less than $1 billion, isn't it?
It's less than $1 billion. And to be honest with you, you talk to people who don't do market sizing but know a hell of a lot about OpenRAN and about infrastructure. So let's bring up another analyst. He's from a sister company, Gabriel Brown at Heavy Reading. He was chatting with my editor Phil Harvey yesterday on a little video that went up on the website about OpenRAN that this man will have done.
Produced by Pierre, of course.
And he was saying, you look at the way it's developing, next year is probably just going to be more trials, a few companies announcing it going into production networks. We've got a number of challenges that still need to be overcome. What's going to happen on the semiconductor front? But he said, to look at this stuff, it's a 4 to 5 year time frame really, before it really starts to take off. Yeah, OpenRAN. Yeah. There's so much hype about OpenRAN at the moment. People are getting really carried away with it because governments and the industry have operators and governments have talked about it in a way that makes it out to be like a panacea to all the world's problems, and it's still a very, very small deal. It's less than 1% of overall spending at the moment. If it goes up to 10% by 2024, that's staggering growth. For it to be 40 billion by 2025, I mean, I don't get it. Yeah. I mean, maybe Analysys Mason, if anybody there's watching this, maybe they can explain where that forecast comes from. And I don't like to just sort of call out analysts and say you're talking shit. But
and full disclosure, you worked there.
I did used to work for Analysys Mason a long time ago, although not as an analyst. I was sort of tweaking
making
text
coffee, weren't you?
And making coffee. Yeah.
I'm just looking up because you reminded me of one other thing, which is I wrote a story headline: UK goes big on OpenRAN.
Well, this ties in with the hype. Yeah.
And so basically the UK came out with one of these government things that when we've had a think.
Anyone want that?
No, you haven't, mate. We've had a think, and this is how we reckon things should be in telecoms, which always cracks us up. Journalistically, that's our area of expertise. I'm not going to claim to be an expert compared to an engineer or whatever, but that's our area of expertise. And when the government just decides to poke its nose in, and we got that guy, I can't remember his name.
Dowden. Yeah,
Dowden, and they have a difference DCMS person.
He read law at Cambridge before.
Right,
going
so he
into
read
politics,
law,
but
and
now he's an OpenRAN expert.
I'm giving telecoms a go because it'll look good on my CV. And he's gone, yeah, we're all about OpenRAN now.
Yeah,
and you can tell, he doesn't obviously know anything about it. And the question is, why is he all about OpenRAN? I'm going to hand it to you because I've got a sneeze going on. And I think, and I want you to discuss this, I think it's because of political pressure, probably from the US.
Yeah, agreed. I think OpenRAN's become the
That's got it.
The technology that people have latched onto as a way to diversify the equipment sector, and governments like the UK see it as a way to deal with the Huawei problem specifically. They've come along and been pretty draconian with Huawei, more so than any other government in Europe. I think there were new
Especially
rules.
With the recent thing where they
new rules announced this week.
Ramped it up. Well, that was part of the same story.
It's part of the same story. It's interesting.
They said you can't even look at Huawei kit from next year.
And clearly they're looking at OpenRAN as an answer, because it was the same day that the announcement was, it dovetailed with the announcement about you can't install Huawei equipment after September next year. Lo and behold, there's this paper out on all about, I don't know how many times OpenRAN appeared in it, but it must, if you did a search, it was probably dozens.
And it was the same very top level stuff. Like there's a few people, I don't know if they name drop people like Parallel or whatever, but there's a few companies that look like they might be good at this.
Yeah.
And that's about the extent of their
And this is
insight.
the thing. But the question for me is, I just don't think that OpenRAN is necessarily going to give them what they want. They want when OpenRAN came along originally, it wasn't as politicised as it is now.
No.
It was basically an opportunity to lower costs perhaps and introduce innovation into parts of the network where, if you wanted to go and do sort of rural rollouts where you felt the big kit vendors weren't really prioritising stuff like that, then maybe OpenRAN would be a good solution to do that.
And give the big kit vendor something to think about in negotiations.
Exactly. And now it's become how to diversify the supply chain.
Away from Chinese vendors.
Away from Chinese vendors. Heavy Reading did a survey where actually that came out as the number one reason for using OpenRAN was to diversify the supply chain. And I'm not convinced it will diversify the supply chain, because
so this is moving on to the sort of final segment, because I suspect you're going to talk about some of the writing you've done on the sort of cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
Just for Pierre's purposes, when he's doing his little caption.
His little labels up on the screen.
So why don't you just keep going as you were? I just wanted to interrupt with that little juncture.
Yeah, so on the diversification point, the RAN sector, and I talked to a couple of people this week on the record, talked to Nokia actually about it. They've obviously got, they're an interesting company because they're one of the big kit vendors, but more enthusiastic about OpenRAN than the other ones. They sort of positioning it as an opportunity, but at the same time, you could say they've got quite a lot to lose from it. And
they all do.
They made the point. I said to them, well, the RAN market has consolidated a lot in the last 20 years. You go back to when I first got into telecom, there used to be, I don't know if it was a dozen, but there were 8, 9, 10 maybe companies selling RAN equipment. They were quite, people like Motorola, Alcatel, Lucent, Nortel, Siemens. You put them all together and you had a really quite diversified market. We've now gone down to 3 big vendors controlling about 80%. And
one of them's been ruled out.
And one has been ruled out in some countries.
So sorry to interrupt, but to quickly recap on the Delora numbers, Huawei's at 30% of the total telecoms kit market.
Yeah, and I think Nokia's on 16, and maybe Nokia's on 15.
Yeah, Ericsson and Nokia.
Like
so Ericsson and Nokia combined are about the same as Huawei. Yeah. So taking Huawei out of the equation is a massive chunk.
Yeah, I mean those numbers are better for Ericsson really, because it's a mobile specialist.
Yes.
Whereas Nokia does all sorts of things.
And it should be stressed that both Huawei and ZTE do a bit of both.
Yeah. But the consolidation that's happened in the industry, this sector requires huge R&D commitments. The companies themselves have been squeezed on pricing. We've had a Chinese vendor coming along and putting a huge amount of pricing pressure on the existing vendors. You look at their margins; they're not massively profitable. In fact, I think Nokia might even, until recently, was loss-making. I don't see that there's a rip-off going on in any sense, and I'm not convinced that OpenRAN companies coming along who are very, very small there's this big argument that gets made about because it's general purpose kit, it's going to be cheaper than customized kit. Nobody ever looks at that very analytically. They just sort of take it as read that because it's general purpose, it must be cheaper. No,
and
it
there
won't
will be someone whose job it is to provide the special sauce, and they'll still be able to charge what they want.
Yeah. And I just wonder if this market is going to end up consolidating in the future again to just, a few, if Ericsson and Nokia decide they're going to start doing it, which they will if it becomes something that operators really seriously want, and it's more than 10% of the market in future, they're going to get into it. how are small companies going to be able to compete against the industry giants?
I mean,
they'll get bought, they'll get acquired. And the only way they won't get acquired is if regulators intervene and say, no, we're going to block. Now, how does a regulator justify blocking the takeover of Mavenir by Ericsson when it allowed Nokia to buy Alcatel-Lucent?
Totally. And, and that's where we get into the sort of state intervention in markets thing. They don't know what they're doing. Oliver Dowden, I'm sure he's a great bloke. I'm sure he got a great degree from Oxford in law and all that. But he doesn't know shit about telecoms. No. He's just passing the message.
And he'll be doing a different job in 2 years' time. He'll be moved around to do something else. So.
And yet suddenly they're going, and this is consistent with the current climate we're in, where suddenly the government feels empowered to poke its nose into pretty much fucking everything.
Yeah.
Suddenly they're poking their nose into it, going, "No, I do this," and picking winners and subsidising this and sanctioning that. And I just don't see how
this is the Star of Praman taking effect.
Yeah, I just took a big swig. It caught up with me. Sorry about that. It's very unprofessional. But they should just stay out. They can't pick winners. The reason it sounds a bit free market fundamentalist, but the reason the market has to be there is because there's all these forces, supply and demand. There's a million different stakeholders all going, no, I want this, I want that. It's a very dynamic, very fluid system.
Yep.
You can't just have a top-down dilettante come in and go, nah, do this. It never works.
It doesn't, no.
I mean, it might work in somewhere like China where you've got an entire massive ecosystem that's all controlled from the top. And I'd have to chat to someone in China.
And I worry as well about, and I know there are analysts that have expressed concern about this as well. And actually, I quoted one I didn't speak to him directly, but he'd written a piece on LinkedIn which I referred to, and we both know Dean Bubley. Who'd written a piece about.
He messaged me on Twitter to say that he was cracking up at our last podcast.
Oh, that's good to know.
Thanks, Dean.
But he wrote a really good piece on LinkedIn about governments going too far in terms of what they mandate, and the fact that it's almost getting to the stage where the UK, it seems, and maybe other governments in Europe actually start to introduce OpenRAN requirements into tenders, and say that if you're going to come and compete in our equipment market, it has to be OpenRAN compliant, and that's something the UK, this telecom task force they set up a few weeks ago with Ian Livingston in charge. Even he was advising against that. He was saying we don't want to go down the road of just having OpenRAN as a solution. You want to have a number of players, some doing proprietary, some doing OpenRAN.
To
actually mandate OpenRAN. That you have to do this system that's come along.
We've decided
because we've decided this makes sense. It's almost like saying you can't sell Apple Macs anymore because they're too tightly integrated, and everybody should go out and build their own PCs from scratch. Because that's the only way. That's the only way we should do it. Well, it's not my analogy. I nicked that off Daryl Schooler from Omdia, I should say. But
good. Now you get little informal brownie points for passing on the compliment.
But are we way over our allotted?
No, we're good. We're good.
Yeah.
But we will start wrapping up soon. Yes. So,
cost is what we were going to talk about.
Yeah. Go on, because you wrote about that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the original arguments about OpenRAN was
I'll have another burpy swig of my beer.
Was about lowering costs, and as I say, this heavy reading survey showed that the main incentive seems to be supply diversity. Costs actually quite low down compared to maybe where you'd have seen it a few years ago. And I think the trouble is people are realising it's probably not going to save you that much money. It might do in the future, maybe, but. Neville Ray at T-Mobile US raised a few questions about this at an investor conference. He had a bit of a go at OpenRAN and said a lot of these arguments about
Because I wonder about him because now that Ledger's
is he English?
Gone, I think he is.
I thought his name was Ray Neville.
Ray Neville,
but it's
Neville Ray. But he's got a kind of slightly strange accent. You can't quite place it, but he sounds like he might be.
No, Neville is.
He
not
does sound like
name.
He's probably sort of Anglo, and then has been in like California.
But he stood up at this investor event.
One thing interests me. Sorry to butt in. Like he's been a real gobshite in the past, but he's a CTO. He knows what he's talking about. So I wonder whether now that Ledger's gone, how much of Neville Ray stuff, like he'd stand up. I remember once he was at an Ericsson thing and he'd be wearing his pink T-shirt and giving it all that.
He doesn't do that anymore, no?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I'm asking you, because he's sort of fallen off my radar, but I wonder whether he was just
I know that
CEO.
his comments weren't welcomed by Deutsche Telekom. I can tell you that because I got in touch with them.
Which comments?
About OpenRAN.
Saying it's a bit overblown.
Yeah, he basically stood up and said it's a bit overblown. He said we're not really convinced by it at the moment. He says a lot of cost stuff we think it's a big TBD at the moment.
And we should stress, that Deutsche Telekom owns.
Yeah, and
or bits of it anyway.
And I did a bit of digging around this, but I wrote quite a long story about OpenRAN costs and how probably it won't save you much money after all. Spoke to a few analysts about it.
Did you
the figure I cited
did you do
earlier,
any Excel work?
Did a bit of Excel work.
Oh, good.
But the figure I came out with earlier, the fact that the wireless equipment market is 150 billion, and RAN, sorry, not OpenRAN, but RAN within that's about a fifth of that. Then you've got all the other spending that goes on. They've got a lot of questions about, are you really going to save money on general purpose equipment, overusing stuff that's sold at scale, that's customised to do one particular job.
I mean, it'll still have to be specialised to the job to some degree.
Exactly. And you start to realise that the cost savings they're probably minuscule. In fact, I mean, I have to read the story because I can't even remember some of the calculations that I put into it. But you're talking about...
I'll take your word for it.
You're talking about a tiny, tiny percentage of what operators spend in capital expenditure that they might be able to save.
So the marginal saving,
improvement is it works out a really minuscule amount of spending, and then you look at the operating costs is an even bigger issue, because if you all of a sudden you're using multiple companies, and you might even need to bring a systems integrator in to manage all this.
So there's an extra layer of cost.
There's an extra layer of cost there anyway.
And the SI will probably be Ericsson or something.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Exactly.
No, that's a really good point, and that'll be, what's really made me laugh about when we've, like when we were allowed to have actual live press conferences, maybe it was like 11 months ago, we had that Ericsson one in London, when we knew Mobile Congress wasn't happening, and they quickly just got one in that hotel.
Yeah.
And then we went out with that pissed analyst after. And I stood up, and I think Ray stood up, and we were challenging Ericsson on the OpenRAN stuff, because they were being really sitting on the fence. They're going, yes, we really like OpenRAN.
Yeah.
That's my Swedish accent.
That's not bad.
And
it's all about the 5G.
and we were like, you're not fooling us, son. I think it might even be Frederick who was there, and he was knackered, wasn't he?
He was
he
jet
ill?
lagged.
Oh, he was jet lagged.
Because he just literally got off a plane, I think.
Yeah, he was knackered. It's a fair play to him standing up and putting up with shit from us. But, I maintain how I felt on that day, and I still do that now. They've got to talk a good game, because their customers are quite keen on OpenRAN.
Yeah.
Or at least they're saying they are.
Yeah.
So they can't be just like, fuck OpenRAN. Because that will seem, quite rightly, it will seem contemptuous. It will seem like they're taking their customers for granted. But obviously, behind closed doors, if we had Frederick in here now, and we turned off the cameras and we went off and finished our... By the way...
I gave him a few pumps.
By the way, this is nice. This Hazy Jane.
You do like it, yeah?
Yeah,
I love
have
it.
a sip of that.
It's a bit fruity, isn't it?
It's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
I love it.
And we took him off and got him to have a few stars or Hazy Janes or whatever. He'd be like, yeah, of course. We hate it.
Yeah.
So we know they hate it because it's an existential risk to their business model.
Yeah.
But I think you're completely right. This is the reason I brought them up. Their counter argument, when they're not sitting on the fence and not holding their cards close to their chest, is going to be, but look at all the extra good shit you get from us, from integrators. So it's the Apple versus PC, the Mac versus PC argument.
Exactly.
And I think if Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, etc. are the Macs versus the PCs, I think that argument does hold some water.
Yeah.
And you found that there isn't even this great saving in going to a PC versus a Mac anyway.
Well, maybe there is. This is a point that Daryl Schooler made at Omdia that if he actually used that analogy that the integrated stuff that you get from Ericsson, if you went out and bought all the components separately and built it yourself, you pay more probably. There's a premium attached to that integrated model. The trouble is that you sort of offset it with all the hassle you have to go to put it all together yourself. So, what you might save on bill of materials, then you end up sort of, you don't realise that. And then the bigger point, putting it into a percentage sort of system is that RAN is actually not. Yeah, it's a lot. They spend a lot on radio, but it's only a small amount of what operators spend overall. You know,
Right.
look at the capex spending and how much goes on the actual RAN. It's, you know,
As opposed to actual towers and stuff like that.
yeah, as opposed to overall wireless. And then you've also got the fixed businesses that some companies have as well. So they've got a lot of other costs they need to support there. Now, you might be able to realise similar savings in areas like transport and the core from virtualisation and some of the other stuff that's going on that's similar to OpenRAN, but it's just in other domains. But there are some things you can't virtualise cement,
Yes.
you know, and you can't
help us.
virtualise labour, and you can't virtualise sales and marketing costs.
Well, I don't say you can't virtualise labour, mate. That's back to our first segment. But anyway.
Well, you still need to have someone to put the bloody thing up unless you get a robot to do it.
Well,
But
watch out.
And then you've got to pay for the robot.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. I want to see if there's a sort of common position on it, on OpenRAN. Actually, yes. This does remind me to go full circle back to the first thing we spoke about. We're saying how, talking about metaphors like letting the fox into the hen house and all that sort of thing. What if you go down the OpenRAN route, and then the main provider of OpenRAN is Amazon? Yeah, that's a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're already good at Edge.
The main provider of OpenRAN might be Nokia or Ericsson.
No, but the main provider of the special source. So you've got like Intel and Lenovo and whoever providing the server kit.
Yeah.
The
application stuff.
You've got Ericsson and Nokia doing the radio stuff. But the cool stuff that makes it all work.
Well, I think that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, so careful what you wish for.
And this is the other thing to sort of bring it back to the big web companies. You know, the web giants. Operators are all of a sudden really worried about vendor consolidation, aren't they, in the radio access network market, and the fact that you've only got these three big companies. There's actually a bit more than that anyway, because you've got other options there that are a little bit smaller. Samsung and you know. But why are they so worried about that, and yet they're so happy to get into bed with Amazon and Microsoft and Google?
Or quite out of the frying pan into the fire, isn't it?
When there's only,
but they're American.
Their dominance is even more worrying than the dominance of Nokia and Ericsson.
And at the same time, the Americans are all doing these antitrust investigations and all these sort of things into them. Anyway, we better wrap it up. One thing I wanted to ask you, just to sort of draw a line under the OpenRAN thing, is are we agreeing that we think, whether it's for money-saving purposes or for geopolitical purposes or for just sheer effectiveness purposes, that we think OpenRAN's a bit overhyped at the moment?
It's massively overhyped. Now, I think it will grow a lot. I agree with the forecast. I think 10% in the market by 2024, 2025 is, you know, if I was an analyst and I had to put numbers out, then I think those are, I think that's quite realistic, and that's massive growth to go from 200 million today,
but driven
to
in part by political considerations.
But I think it's driven by political considerations, and the service providers have just sort of latched onto this as a thing that they think will. Now, maybe there are concerns the service providers. I mean, Gabriel Brown talks about it in a slightly different way. He thinks that people might want, operators might want to use it to address certain use cases they can't at the moment. You know, Orange has talked about using it in indoor settings, for instance, or you might have rural communities where you feel the big kit vendors aren't really prioritising your needs. And if you can bring, new competition in and they address specific requirements that you have, then that's a really good thing. But I think to have it as an option to, an alternative to Huawei,
yeah.
That's ridiculous, quite frankly.
It's
even by 2024,
it's political. It's just
the only thing that's going to happen by 2024 is that a lot more work's going to go the way of Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah, which is fine. They're nice. We like them. Anyway, okay. Well, let's leave it at that. One thing before I wrap it up. There's been no bribe of the week this week. This is something I want to actually set up as a regular segment because I'm just into being bribed, basically. There's no, but I think next week is going to be quite strong because I've had a few bribe offers coming in. I mean, it's because it's Christmas, to be fair. But yeah,
people asking for your address so they can send stuff through.
Yeah, that's how it's working now. So that's good because I don't know me. I've felt the bribes of.
Are we putting a plea out for bribes then?
No, because that's the sort of thing that would, with the Informer sort of corruption training, that's the sort of thing that would get me in trouble.
So don't bribe us.
All I'm saying is that if you do send us a bribe, we might mention you, but I'm not soliciting a bribe. I want to stress that. Anyway, but no, seriously, this is just light-hearted, and they're not bribes. They're just silly little box of chocolate.
They're kind of Christmas presents.
But I think next week there'll be a couple. So that's that. Okay, better wrap it up. Thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the last one of the year next week.